The prestigious hotel in the heart of Washington, D.C., had been transformed for the evening's traditional gala dinner. The size and grandeur of the Fairmont Grand Hotel left a striking impression on all the guests. Top business figures, famous journalists, and politicians entered the hall under the shimmering crystal chandeliers, each carrying their own agenda for the night. Seeing people from all walks of life gathered together in one place was a clear indication of how widespread polarization had become. While lively conversations, the clinking of wine glasses, and soft classical music played in the background, there was an underlying tension. Everyone was waiting for the highly anticipated speech that had been making headlines for days, the address by former President Donald Trump. Trump had returned to office after the 2024 presidential election, and this evening he would once again present his political stance. The emotions of admiration and hatred toward Trump were palpable in the room. Trump had received severe criticism from both extremes, and he was under intense scrutiny. Since his return, debates about him had never ceased. Some admired him as a bold leader, while others viewed his style and words as contributing to the polarization of society. Trump entered the room that evening with a calm demeanor. His son, Barron, was with him. Barron, who had grown up in his father's shadow and under constant media attention, was a young man who sometimes seemed weary of the spotlight. Yet attending the event with his father that evening seemed to symbolize something significant amidst the tension between the country's two polarized sides. As they entered the room, all eyes were drawn to Barron. As someone seemingly carrying the weight of his father's political legacy, Barron was merely an observer that evening. Everyone knew him, but his demeanor suggested he preferred to stay in the background, quietly observing the crowd while keeping his distance. Entering the room, Barron found himself caught between his father's controversial leadership and his own search for identity. He was present in the evening's events but largely silent, scanning the room yet preferring to remain apart from it. During dinner, many guests focused silently on their meals while political matters continued to churn in their minds. Everyone was eager to hear Trump's speech. Some debated what he would say, others anticipated his sharp and provocative style. And then, just as the room grew still, the voice of the host echoed through the microphone. "And now I invite the former president of our country, Mr. Donald Trump, to take the stage and deliver his remarks." All eyes in the room turned toward Trump at that moment. Trump, with his signature smile, stepped onto the stage and settled under the lights. He scanned the room once more with his eyes before taking the microphone and beginning his speech. "My friends, what makes this evening so important for us is not just the fact that we are gathered here, but also that we accept our differences and work together to make our country stronger. Yes, people either love me or they don't. But there is one thing that everyone must respect: the fact that we all, each and every one of us, must stand together for the future of this country." The people in the hall were listening intently to every word Trump spoke. Some nodded in agreement, while others kept their eyes fixed on him. But one thing was clear: everyone felt that this speech was not only a political statement, but also an opportunity to understand his thoughts on societal polarization. In the midst of this, one person was observing closely, a middle-aged man, a supporter of Biden. He had long held a critical view of Trump, but he was also aware of the atmosphere in the room. People were being harsh and rigid toward those who didn't think like them. Many had abandoned the idea of living together and engaging in meaningful dialogue. However, in that moment, he made the decision to ask a question. After listening to Trump's speech carefully, the man paused for a moment. A thought appeared in his mind, a question that might give deeper meaning to the night, perhaps even address the root of polarization. "Trump, why are you so hated?" This question wasn't a simple criticism or an expression of anger. It was a question aimed at delving into the heart of polarization, the beginning of an attempt to uncover the truth. His eyes scanned the crowd, and a few people noticed. Despite the tension in the room, he was ready to set aside his stance against Trump and seek a different perspective. At that moment, he took the microphone and quietly but resolutely turned to Trump and asked, "Why are you so hated?" After the Biden supporter asked, "Why are you so hated, President Trump?" The atmosphere in the room suddenly shifted. The sharpness of the question echoed throughout the space for a few seconds. It was as though many people took a step back, their eyes shifting around, everyone wondering how this question would be received. Some were tense, others were waiting with curiosity. The silence of that moment made time seem to stand still. Those few seconds felt like they lasted a lifetime. Trump scanned each face in the crowd, trying to internalize the weight of the question. This was no longer just a political critique. It felt like a question that probed his humanity as well. The Biden supporter watched Trump, wondering if he had made the right choice. The meaning he read in the eyes of others suggested that this question would create a much bigger stir. What answer was he expecting? Perhaps asking such a direct question was also a big step for him. Trump stood still for a few seconds after hearing the question. It was a moment when he found himself face to face with his inner world, a man who had lived under the pressure of politics and public opinion for years. All the eyes of the crowd were on him, but his gaze had lost its usual joy. After years of being accustomed to harsh rhetoric this time, he felt something different. Amid the deep hatred and criticism, the simplicity and humanity with which the question was asked had an unexpected effect on him. In his mind, he reflected on what it had been like, as a man who had been so heavily criticized for so long, constantly having to accept the hatred directed at him. But now, this question had pushed him onto a journey that made him question his own humanity. For a moment, a feeling rose within him. Am I really hated this much? The Biden supporter was observing Trump's face closely, looking for any change. Like many others, he too was curious about how this question would be answered. Asking the question was meant to provide some clarity. Is Trump really such a bad person? He was trying to answer within himself. He had grown up surrounded by opposing views, but now he was beginning to understand the deeper meaning behind his own question. He started thinking about when and how he and those around him carried such a powerful emotion as hate. Many people, regardless of Trump's answer, would likely shape it according to their political stances. However, this time, the humanity behind the question, the personal angle the questioner had taken, was noticeable to others in the room as well. It felt like a question from the heart, a little more humane, and suddenly, everyone's focus became sharper. A period of silence followed. No one knew what to say. Trump took a deep breath, trying to grasp the depth of the question and find his answer. The weight of the moment was shaping not only his thoughts, but also everyone else's. Which answer would satisfy both himself and the person in front of him? The room held its breath. It was a moment when a figure caught between his own inner emotions and the expectations of society stood alone. Trump, as he often did, realized that he didn't always have to respond with only strong and sharp answers. How should he explain this? What kind of answer should he give to this question? The atmosphere in the room had now become entirely tense. The voices had stopped, and even the faint background music had become more distinct. The entire focus was now on the answer Trump would give. Trump took a deep breath and, with everyone's eyes on him, tried to find his words in the silence. He looked briefly at the crowd and noticed that each face seemed to carry a different emotion. Unexpectedly, in a tone much calmer than his usual sharpness, he began to speak. "This is actually a question that everyone's curious about," Trump began, his voice echoing slowly through the room. "Why am I hated so much? This question makes me think not just of myself as an individual, but as a reflection of society and of a time." He paused for a moment, took a sip of water, and continued. "You know, most of us humans act out of a lot of prejudice. We quickly slap on a label, fit someone into a mold. But in reality, it's not that simple. No one can be defined by just one word or a title. We all have our stories. We all have hard times, breaking points, disappointments, and yes, we all have our mistakes. But what matters is how we deal with our mistakes and what we learn from them." Trump's voice had become softer and more thoughtful. His words were now deeper and more meaningful. There seemed to be a moment in the crowd's eyes that indicated they were satisfied by what they were hearing. Everyone seemed to like seeing him vulnerable, more human, and more accessible. "In my case," Trump said, "I've had all eyes on me for so long, and everything I say and do is interpreted in one way or another. That's not an easy thing. People may love you or hate you, but before we understand that, we must accept the basic human challenges we all face. Not just mine, but everyone's challenges, because unfortunately, as a society, we judge too quickly. For a moment, there was a deep silence. The crowd seemed to be trying to digest what Trump had said. My story, my experiences, are not just about being a political figure. We all have stories. We're all people who struggle with something in life. Sometimes we forget that. We all have different views, different values, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't respect each other. Truly, respect should be the foundation of everything. We all deserve respect, no matter who we are. Trump continued, scanning the eyes of the crowd. Many people easily label me or people like me. But we must remember that behind every label, there's a person. We all have struggles inside us. Some of us face them, others are still trying to cope. But what matters is approaching each other with understanding during this process. After a brief pause, Trump's eyes softened a little. Unfortunately, sometimes the power of hate and anger becomes a wall that separates people. But let's not forget, it's much harder to create something out of hate. Uniting people, understanding them, and showing respect. These are much stronger tools. When Trump finished speaking, there was an unexpected sincerity in his voice. I think the best answer to this question should be for all of us to approach each other with more understanding. Anger and hate can always be powerful, but let's not forget that respect and love are more lasting. We should be kinder, more understanding, so that we can all live better lives in this world. What Trump said had an impact on the room. The crowd, which had been tense up until that moment, suddenly became quieter. Everyone was looking into each other's eyes more carefully, trying to digest what Trump had said. Something inside everyone seemed to have changed, even if just a little. The Biden supporter at first hadn't expected Trump to give such a soft response. In surprise, he continued to listen without taking his eyes off Trump. A respect he had never felt before began to grow inside him. Perhaps this was a side of a person who had been approached with hostility. The other people in the room were also quietly listening to what was being said. In the eyes of many, for a brief moment, the hatred and anger they had felt toward Trump seemed to be replaced by a sense of respect. Everyone, regardless of political views, began to form an emotional connection, because Trump was speaking to them not just as a politician, but as a human being. As Trump slowly put down the microphone, he glanced at the room one last time. "Finally, I want to say this," he said. "No matter what, we should never forget to respect each other. Together, we can become a stronger society." After saying his final words, Trump gently placed the microphone back and took another look at the crowd. The atmosphere in the room had suddenly changed. The initial tension had given way to a kind of calm. The crowd was still somewhat silent, but this silence was symbolic of thoughtful acceptance, a reflection. The Biden supporter looked at Trump with a kind of peace in his eyes. His previously sharp attitude had softened, and it seemed as though he had found the answer to a question in his heart. He slowly got up from his seat and bowed his head toward Trump from across the room. The other people in the room moved in a similar way, looking at each other more carefully and carrying a silent empathy within them, affected by Trump's words. There was now a shared understanding, a connection reflected among them. Something had changed inside everyone. At first glance, many people with opposing views, perhaps even those who seemed to be at odds, felt a little closer to each other that night. Because Trump's response was not just a political statement, but also a social message: respect, empathy, and trying to understand each other. As people left the room, they would remember that night not just for a question and an answer, but for a deeper meaning. It wasn't a simple answer given to anyone, but a conversation about the understanding, respect, and love that humanity requires. It was not just a political debate, but a reminder of how important human relationships are. When everyone left the room, they were a little more thoughtful. That night might have been a turning point that brought them closer. The crowd, internalizing what Trump had said, would continue on their way with a different perspective. Because that night, people saw that not only could their ideas coexist, but their emotions could also exist in mutual respect. Over time, Everyone who remembered that moment came to view it as an enlightening experience. In an era of intense social polarization, the idea that the most important thing was to understand and listen to each other resonated with people. The event spread quickly on social media. People shared what Trump had said, trying to raise awareness. Some expressed how they had been reminded of the meaning of being human, independent of their political beliefs. And suddenly, the speech of that night transcended one person or one group. That night, voices were united, and a message was sent from heart to heart. Respect and understanding are the most important bonds that hold society together. As a result, Trump's answer that night went beyond political boundaries. People who thought differently shared not only their ideas, but also their emotions. And in the end, they realized that perhaps what we all need is to understand how similar we are to each other. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy stories like this and would like to support our channel, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, comment, and subscribe.